Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about something that affects us all. We're going to be talking about stress. And so our definition for today of stress is stress happens when reality falls short of desire or when our wants carry more weight than our haves. Now, to kick off something about stress, it wouldn't be fair unless I told you a story about a time when I was stressed. So I was a part of a church. I was a youth pastor at a church just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. And one of the things that the church did every year was take a trip to Dearborn, Michigan. And Dearborn, Michigan is the home of the largest population of Arab individuals in the United States. And every year they have what's called the International Arab Festival. And so, as a part of what our church was doing to partner with different cultures and things like that, every year we would take a trip and go to the International Arab Festival in Dearborn, Michigan. And I went my first year, and the pastor that went up there with us, he, in a meeting before the event, was telling us all about the jobs and all the things that we could do to serve people while we were up there, clean up trash and hand out water bottles to different individuals. And so we went through and he assigned a job to everybody on the team, except for me. I didn't have a job, and I was a little nervous about that. And so I went up to him afterwards and I said, hey, I don't know if you realized it or not, but you kind of skipped over me and you didn't give me a job to do. And he said, oh, I didn't? And he had that look in his eye like I'm getting ready to tell you something that you don't want to hear. See, what I was thinking was I was probably going to get to ride around in a golf cart and just kind of tell people what to do, maybe give people water. But he had something different in mind. He said, I want you to be the MC on stage for the entire event. Okay. I like to speak, I like to do things like that, so it was okay. And then I realized, wait, I'd be introducing all the musical acts and reading all the commercials and things, and introducing the musical acts, they were all Arab individuals with Arab-sounding names. And being a white boy from the South, I didn't know how I would do with that. So I was a little nervous, a little stressed, but that's not the stressed part, because, I went to each person who was going to be performing and I said, hey, I would be awesome if I could get your name phonetically so that I can say it perfectly. And that was easy. But as a part of the festival, they do this thing called the Arab Idol competition. And what Arab Idol is local acts from high schools and things. They come and they sing or they dance, they play musical instruments in front of a panel of 3 judges. And it's on a Saturday morning. There's a few thousand people in the crowd, but it's not like the big event. The Arab Festival typically draws between 150 and 300,000 people. And so Arab Idol happens on a Saturday morning when these 3 judges are there and people come up and they sing. And there's a few thousand people, but the festival itself stretches out over 11 city blocks. And so there's not a whole lot of pressure on Saturday morning for the contestants. And so they ask us every year to send a couple people to participate in the competition. And so I play guitar, and I had a girl that led worship for our students, and we went up there and we sang a song, I don't remember what it was, in front of a few thousand people. And another girl from our group, I didn't know who she was, I just met her. She went up there and she sang a song I had never heard before, and she was playing keyboard and singing, and she absolutely killed it. And so what happens is, if you get in one of the first 3 places on Saturday morning in the competition, you get to come back on Saturday night and perform in front of about 60 or 70,000 people to open up the festival and the concert on Saturday night. Well, we didn't place, we finished in 4th, but the girl who went behind us from our group, she got 3rd place. And so she got to come back on Saturday night to perform her song in front of 60 or 70,000 stadium arena-sized crowd. Everything was fine. I was going to introduce her and it was going to be great. Until about a half an hour before the concert was supposed to start, she came to me in a panic and she said, I don't have a keyboard. The girl whose keyboard I borrowed to play my song earlier didn't place in the competition, and so she took it home with her. I need you to play guitar for me. You need what? I need you to play guitar, but I've never heard your song. Yeah, you need to learn it real fast. And so we went backstage and we sat down and we tried to arrange the song, and I'm hearing it for the first time, never played it through, when I get a call on the radio that said, hey, we're starting a few minutes early. We need you to be on the stage now. If you're not here in the next 45 seconds, there's going to be 60 or 70,000 people staring at a dead stage. So we grabbed the guitar and we ran, and there I am in front of 60,000 people, not having any clue what I'm doing. That's the most stressful situation I think I've ever been in. 3 minutes later, though, it was over. We did okay. The crowd seemed to be happy with what we did, but it was incredibly stressed because it was a battle between what I wanted and what I had. You see, what I had was 30 minutes and a song I'd never done. What I wanted was about 2 weeks to get ready for this performance. And that's what causes stress, when our wants outweigh our haves. You see, in America, we know what stress is. Matter of fact, I learned that there's something called the ASI. That's the American Stress Institute. Our stress is so bad as a country that it has to be institutionalized. 1 in 5 people, 20% of the country, is so stressed they fall into a category called extreme stress, which means they have heart palpitations, excessive sweating, and they're shaky and they're jittery. So for 1 in 5 people of you watching this, it's not the coffee that's making you jittery when you wake up in the morning, it's just the fact that you woke up in the morning. So we're going to address that. We're going to talk about how you can change your perspective to maybe even become stress-free. I know that sounds like an infomercial, but I promise it's biblical, and we're going to talk about it. But first, we're going to talk about a change in perspective and what that means. So when we need to change perspective, or when we have to change perspective, we just need to reevaluate or reposition or see things from a different angle. One of my favorite stories is from one of my favorite authors, and his name was Douglas Adams. And Douglas Adams wrote one of my favorite books called A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And he talks about one time when he was at a train station in England, how he was waiting for his train, and he picked up a newspaper and a pack of cookies and some coffee, and he went and he sat down at a table, and there was another gentleman across from him that was sitting down at the same table, and they kind of made eye contact and exchanged pleasantries, and then Douglas went to his crossword puzzle, and he started figuring out some of the clues when he noticed that the man across from him reached over, opened up his pack of cookies, and put one in his mouth and started to eat it. And he said, as an Englishman, we're not trained in these situations. We don't do confrontation. He said, if this was America, you know what would have happened. Somebody would have pulled out a gun, there would have been gunfire, police, and CNN would have been all over it. But the English don't really have a way to handle that. So he said, I did what every respectable English person would do, and I just kind of sat there and hoped he didn't do it again. He said, but then I decided, you know what, I'm going to show him that these are my cookies. And so he reached over and he grabbed a cookie and he started eating one. He said the man kind of looked at him a little strange. And then they kind of went back and forth. Each man would take a cookie and eat it until the pack was gone. He said, about that time, the man got up and left, and he kind of looked at me weird, and I kind of looked at him funny. And that was about the time my train came. And so I finished my coffee, and I grabbed the empty cookie bag, and I lifted up my newspaper, and there were my cookies. They had been under the newspaper the whole time. He said I was the one who was actually in the wrong eating the other man's cookies. It was my perspective changing that I realized that I was the person that was in the offense. He said the funny part is, though, there's somebody who's been running around England for the last 25 years thinking somebody's eaten his cookie, but only I have the punchline. So what we need sometimes, like Douglas Adams, is just to kind of see things from a different angle. And so that's what we're going to attempt to do today. I have just an idea maybe that would help you see things in a different light, in a different way. So what if I told you that the secret to being stress-free is to forget just one little phrase? It's a little 2-word phrase. It only has 5 letters. It's a phrase that's used by the young, by the old, by the rich, by the poor. It's used all the time. We have movies that have been written about this little phrase, TV shows, songs. It's crazy how pervasive it is in our culture. And here's what I want you to do. If you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. The phrase is, and then hold right there. We're going to stop right there for a second, and I'll let you know what that phrase is in just a minute. But I want to talk about what God has to say about this first, and then we'll get into what that phrase is. So if you have your Bibles with you, turn to Philippians Chapter 4. While you're getting there, let me tell you a little bit about who is writing this letter. His name is Paul. He was an early follower of Jesus, a former Jew who believed that Jesus is the Son of God. he traveled all over the world to tell people about Jesus. And as he traveled, he planted churches. He started churches. Sometimes people were incredibly hostile to what he was doing. They would put him in jail. And you can imagine, as a former Jew, as somebody who claimed that Jesus was the Messiah and in reality kind of renounced that form of Judaism that says Jesus was just a teacher, he was in trouble a lot when he would travel through Jerusalem. And one time when he traveled through Jerusalem, they captured him and they put him in jail, and they said, hey, we want you to go in front of the high priest. But Paul, who was a Roman citizen, said, no, I want to take my case straight to Nero, who was Caesar at the time. And so they took him to Rome and they put him in prison. And the prison that they put him in was an underground prison. The name of it is Mamertine Prison. And if you go on Google and you search Mamertine, you can see the actual prison that Paul was kept in. And so it's from this prison that he's writing this letter to the church he planted in Philippi. And so this is what he says in chapter 4, starting in verse 15. He says, moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving, except only you. For even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid more than once when I was in need. Not that I desire your gifts. What I desire is that more be credited to your account. I have received full payment and have more than enough. I'm supplied now that I have received from Epaphroditus, the person that they sent, the gifts that you sent with him. They are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to God. You see, they hooked him up. They knew he had need. He was in prison, and they sent Epaphroditus with a bunch of stuff. And people in prison at that time, they had a need of a lot of things. They needed food, they needed clothes, they needed, in Paul's case, writing utensils, and then money to purchase all this stuff with. And Paul didn't have anything, but they brought it to him in abundance, and he was thanking them for that. But let's jump back to verse 10 and hear what Paul has to say about his life before these gifts. In verse 10 he says, I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed you were concerned, but you had no way to show it. You see, this is like us hearing about somebody who's in the hospital and we reach out on Facebook or a text message saying, hey, is there anything I can do? And the person's like, just hold tight, we don't know what we need yet, or whatever. They knew Paul needed things and they wanted to give to him, but they just didn't know how to do it. And so he's saying, hey, I heard that you wanted to show me love, to give me things. You were concerned about me, but you didn't have any way to show it. In verse 11, he says this, I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Yet it was good of you to share my troubles. Paul's saying, thank you for what you did. But the key is in verse 11 when he says, I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. He's saying even if he had nothing, he was content in Mamertine prison. He was content with the circumstances. He was content because he knew who Jesus was. Now, that phrase that I told you, that I almost gave you, that I told you to write down, the phrase is, I'm going to give it to you right now. That phrase is, I wish. I wish. See, a wish is hopeful. It's remorseful. I wish things were different. It's magical, right? Thank you, Disney. When you wish upon a star, it makes no difference who you are. Anything your heart desires will come to you. That is so sweet. It's so hopeful, but it's full of crap. I mean, come on. If anything our heart desires would come to us, we'd all be driving Lamborghinis on the way home from our Major League Baseball careers, just finishing up the movie that we shot back to our home in Hollywood, in the Hollywood Hills, in our $30,000 mansion. I mean, let's just get real. If wishes came true, then that wish I made at my 12-year-old birthday party to finally kiss Kim Hartzell, the cutest girl in my math class, would have came true. And it definitely did not. You say, listen, wishes are harmless, right? I mean, we talk about wishes all the time. I wish this pizza had more pepperoni. Man, I wish I would have ordered a salad. Man, I wish they would have had Coke instead of Pepsi. And the reason that we make wishes is because we're not content with our current circumstances. I wish they had Coke, not Pepsi, because I don't want some knockoff beverage. I want the real thing. I'm not content with this soda water, right? But some wishes, aren't so harmless. I mean, our society, we kind of throw wishes around. Think of the movies, just the movies that talk about wishes. You have, like, A Wonderful Life, where George Bailey wishes he's never been born. Aladdin, who gets 3 wishes from the genie. And then you have Tom Hanks in Big, who wishes he could be, well, big. And then what about all those Trading Places knockoffs, like Vice Versa, 18 Again, Wish Upon a Star, The Hot Chick, The Change Up, and the 900 remakes of Freaky Friday? What's so bad about a wish? But it assumes that we're not happy in our present circumstances. But there are some not so harmless wishes as well, like George Bailey's wish. I wish I'd never been born. What about, I wish I was married to someone else? I wish I was rich. I wish my job didn't suck. I wish my kids were different. Back in verse 11, I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. But it's hard. Well, you're not in Mamertine prison. You don't know my kids. I'd rather take prison. But even then, you still wouldn't be content. Well, I just can't do that. Well, neither could Paul at first. I mean, in verse 11 and 12, the first few times I read over this, I missed a word, a pretty key word. Paul says he learned to be content. In other words, contentment is something that we can learn. Listen to this. Earlier in Paul's ministry career, 2 Corinthians 1, 8 through 10, he says this. He's writing to the church in Corinth. And he says, "We do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death." He says, look, we were not content in our circumstances. We thought we were going to die. We were afraid for our lives. Then he goes on, he says, "But that was to make us not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will deliver us again." He had to learn how to be content. We've got to stop wishing in stars and start trusting in Jesus. Jesus himself talked about this in Matthew 6, and he said, stop worrying about things. He said, look at the birds in the air. They don't have any food. They don't work for food, but God's going to take care of them. Look at the lilies of the field. They don't have to worry about anything, and they're more beautiful. They're clothed more beautiful than Solomon, who was the richest king ever. He says, stop worrying about anything other than today, for today has enough to worry about. Be content in God and know that God is going to supply you with the things that you need. Here's the question. What if we stopped whining and became content? What if we started being content with our daily circumstances? What if Christians became known as the people who were stress-free? People who are always content no matter the circumstances because we actually trust that our God knows what he's doing. What if we wanted what we have instead of what we want? What if we started wanting the things that we have because we know God has provided them and we don't need anything else, rather than constantly wishing for things that we don't have? Here's the secret of less stress. The secret of a happy life. Want what you have, not what you want.